December 22nd, 1944. The Ardennes. The forests of Belgium stood frozen beneath a hard gray sky. Snow packed the narrow roads into brittle ribbons of ice. Engines coughed in the cold. Convoys stretched for miles. Artillery, tank destroyers, fuel trucks, all inching north through traffic that barely moved. In Bastogne, American paratroopers of the 101st Airborne Division were surrounded. German armor pressed from every direction. Ammunition was low. Medical supplies were nearly gone. The temperature fell below freezing each night. Farther south, at 3rd Army headquarters in Luxembourg, General George S. Patton studied his maps. He had already begun turning his entire army 90 degrees north, a maneuver few believed possible in winter. Meanwhile, Allied command had shifted. Field Marshal Bernard Law, Montgomery, now controlled the northern sector of the Bulge. Communications were tense. Coordination was critical. At some point in those frozen days, a request moved across the Allied command structure. The roads must be cleared. But in the Ardennes, nothing moved without friction. And some roads were more than just snowbound highways. They were about authority. By December 1944, many Allied soldiers believed the war in Western Europe was entering its final phase. Paris had been liberated in August. Brussels fell soon after. Antwerp's vast port facilities were captured intact in early September, a logistical prize that promised to shorten the war. German forces were retreating toward their own borders. The Western Front appeared cracked, but beneath that surface confidence, problems multiplied. The Allied advance, after Normandy, had outrun its supply lines. Fuel shortages slowed armored divisions. Trucks drove day and night along the Red Ball Express, yet it was not enough. Railways and ports in France were damaged. Antwerp remained unusable for weeks due to German control of the Scheldt estuary. In September, Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery proposed Operation Market Garden, a bold airborne and ground assault designed to leap across the Rhine through the Netherlands. The operation failed to secure its final bridge at Arnhem. German resistance proved stronger than expected. Casualties were heavy. The war did not end by Christmas. Autumn settled into a grinding stalemate along the German frontier. The terrain changed. Gone were the open plains of France. Ahead lay forests, rivers, fortified towns, and the concrete teeth of the West Wall, the Siegfried Line. Intelligence assessments suggested Germany was exhausted. Allied planners believed the Wehrmacht no longer possessed the strength for large-scale offensive action in the West. Adolf Hitler believed otherwise. Behind the lines, German divisions were being quietly rebuilt. Panzer units withdrawn from the Eastern Front were refitted. Fuel reserves were hoarded, ammunition stockpiled. Secrecy was enforced with unusual discipline. Radio silence masked troop movements. Even German field commanders were told little of the full plan. The objective was ambitious: split the Allied armies, seize Antwerp, and fracture the Anglo-American alliance. The chosen ground was the Ardennes. The region was rugged and wooded, hills, narrow roads, dense forest. In 1940, German forces had launched their breakthrough through these same forests, achieving surprise against France. Allied commanders in 1944 considered the Ardennes a quiet sector. American divisions there were either inexperienced or recovering from previous combat. On December 16, 1944, at 5:30 a.m., more than 1,500 German artillery pieces opened fire. The barrage shattered the frozen morning. Under cover of snow and fog, German infantry and armored columns advanced westward. Elite formations, including the 6th Panzer Army, under SS Obergruppenführer Sepp Dietrich and the 5th Panzer Army under General Hasso von Manteuffel spearheaded the assault. The American lines bent almost immediately. Communication lines were cut. Units became isolated. Roads clogged with retreating vehicles and refugees. In the first days, confusion reigned. Reports reaching Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, (ASHAF), were incomplete and contradictory. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the Supreme Allied Commander, initially believed the attack might be a localized counteroffensive. Within 48 hours, the scale became undeniable. The Germans had driven a deep wedge into the Allied front. By December 19th, the penetration created what would later be called the Bulge, a large salient thrust westward into American positions. Towns such as St. Vith and Bastogne became critical crossroads. Whoever controlled the road network controlled the campaign. Bastogne, in particular, sat at the intersection of 7 major roads. German planners knew this, so did American commanders. As German armored units raced toward the Meuse River, American resistance stiffened around key nodes. The 101st Airborne Division and elements of the 10th Armored Division were rushed into Bastogne. They arrived just ahead of Encirclement. By December 20th, Bastogne was surrounded. Snow fell harder. Temperatures dropped below freezing. Air support was grounded by heavy overcast. The Germans tightened their ring. The Allied command structure faced a severe challenge. The northern shoulder of the Bulge was collapsing under pressure from the 6th Panzer Army. The southern shoulder wavered. Coordination between British and American forces became urgent. Eisenhower needed unity of command. The battlefield was no longer a steady front line. It was a chaotic patchwork of breakthroughs, roadblocks, and desperate defensive stands. And in war, roads matter. In the Ardennes, they would decide not only supply and maneuver, but influence, reputation, and authority among Allied leaders. Because as the German offensive deepened, the question was no longer simply how to stop it. It became who would take control of stopping it. On December 19, 1944, General Dwight D. Eisenhower summoned his senior commanders to Verdun. The atmosphere inside the headquarters was tense but controlled. The German breakthrough was real. The scale was serious, yet Eisenhower refused panic. His instinct was operational clarity. The immediate priority was stabilization. The American First Army, commanded by Lieutenant General Courtney Hodges, had borne the brunt of the German assault in the north. Its communications with 12th Army Group Commander General Omar Bradley were disrupted by the German penetration. Field units were fighting in isolation. Coordination across the Bulge had fractured. Eisenhower made a decisive administrative choice. To simplify command and restore coherence, he temporarily placed the U.S. First Army, and later the U.S. First Army, and later the U.S. 9th Army, under Field Marshal Bernard Law Montgomery's 21st Army Group in the north. It was not a political gesture. It was a geographic necessity. Montgomery's headquarters lay north of the Bulge, with clearer lines of communication and operational reach into the threatened sector. By consolidating command above the penetration, Eisenhower aimed to seal the northern shoulder and prevent German forces from breaking through to the Meuse River. South of the Bulge, General George S. Patton commanded the U.S. Third Army. Patton had been advancing eastward toward the Saar region. His forces were engaged in offensive operations aimed at penetrating the German frontier. When word of the Ardennes attack reached him, he immediately grasped the implications. The German offensive had created an exposed flank. If Bastogne fell, German armored columns could exploit the road network and push west. If the Meuse was reached, Antwerp might again be threatened. The political and strategic consequences would be enormous. At Verdun, Eisenhower asked Patton a direct question: how quickly could Third Army disengage from its current offensive and pivot north to relieve pressure on the Bulge? Patton answered with precision. He proposed to attack north within 48 hours. His staff had already begun contingency planning before the meeting. Patton anticipated the possibility of a German counterstroke and had prepared alternative operational routes. Within days, 3 of his divisions would begin moving through icy roads toward Bastogne. It was one of the most rapid, large-scale redeployments of the war. Meanwhile, Montgomery consolidated his northern defense. He reorganized battered American units, reinforced defensive lines along the Meuse, and prepared a counteroffensive aimed at pinching off the Bulge from the north once the German advance stalled. His method was deliberate. He believed in thorough preparation before launching major attacks. Patton believed in speed. The two men represented contrasting philosophies of war. Montgomery favored centralized control, careful buildup, and limited objectives executed methodically. Patton favored aggressive maneuver, rapid exploitation, and relentless pressure. Eisenhower needed both. By December 21st, Bastogne was fully encircled. German forces demanded surrender. Brigadier General Antony McAuliffe's reply, "Nuts," became legend. But legend did not clear snow from roads or bring ammunition through frozen forests. Only movement could do that. Patton's Third Army began its northward thrust on December 22nd. Units struggled through narrow Ardennes roads, clogged with retreating traffic, refugees, broken vehicles, and military convoys attempting to move in opposite directions. Military police attempted to impose order. Engineers worked around the clock to repair bridges and widen passageways. In this environment, road access became more than a logistical concern. It was operational survival. The British and American sectors now converged on a shrinking battlefield. Montgomery held command in the north. Patton advanced from the south. Eisenhower remained at the center, balancing personalities as carefully as he balanced divisions. The Germans continued to press westward, but their timetable was slipping. Fuel shortages slowed panzer columns. American resistance stiffened. Weather began to clear intermittently, allowing Allied aircraft to strike German supply lines. The Bulge had expanded. But it was losing momentum. And inside Allied headquarters, tension grew. Coordination between northern and southern forces required precise movement along limited road networks. Requests moved across command channels. Timelines were debated. Authority was sensitive. Montgomery would later address the press regarding the northern defense. Patton would read those remarks carefully. But before public words were spoken, winter roads needed to be opened, cleared, and controlled. Because in the Ardennes, whoever controlled the roads controlled the battle. And in coalition warfare, control often meant more than geography. It meant recognition. The Battle of the Bulge was not only a clash of armies, it was a collision of leadership styles under extreme strain. George S. Patton believed in movement above all else. His campaigns in North Africa and across France had reinforced a single conviction: momentum disorients the enemy. Speed fractures resistance. Aggression prevents stagnation. He often studied the campaigns of Napoleon and Stonewall Jackson, searching for lessons in rapid maneuver. When news of the German offensive reached Third Army headquarters, Patton did not see only a crisis. He saw an opportunity to strike the exposed flank of the German penetration. His staff later recalled that he had already ordered contingency planning. Before the Verdun meeting with Eisenhower, 3 separate operational plans were prepared. Options to pivot north on 24, 48, or 72 hours' notice. This preparation was not improvisation. It reflected Patton's belief that a commander must anticipate the enemy's boldest move. The pivot north, a 90-degree turn of an entire field army in winter, required precise timing. Units disengaged from offensive positions, redirected artillery, rerouted supply convoys, and reorganized communications. Patton's orders were concise. His instructions emphasized urgency. The weather was brutal. Ice coated the roads. Vehicles slid into ditches. Yet Third Army moved. To Patton, clearing roads was not administrative housekeeping. It was the prerequisite for attack. In his diary entries during late December 1944, Patton expressed frustration with hesitation at higher levels. He valued clarity of responsibility. He expected freedom of maneuver. The faster Bastogne was relieved, the more decisive the psychological blow against Germany. Delay, in his view, meant danger. Bernard Law Montgomery operated differently. His experience in North Africa and at El Alamein had shaped a cautious but calculated doctrine. He preferred overwhelming force, meticulous preparation, and carefully defined objectives. Montgomery did not believe in rapid, loosely coordinated attacks. He believed in deliberate action with secure flanks. When Eisenhower transferred the U.S. 1st and 9th Armies under his temporary command on December 20th, Montgomery's task was defensive stabilization. The northern shoulder of the Bulge was fragile. German panzer units threatened the Meuse River crossings. Montgomery reorganized scattered American divisions. He established defensive lines anchored to terrain. He prioritized containment before counterattack. This approach frustrated some American officers who preferred immediate offensive action. But Montgomery's perspective was shaped by risk management. If the Germans broke through to the Meuse, the strategic situation would deteriorate rapidly. His command style was formal. His communication was precise. He demanded strict adherence to operational plans. Montgomery also understood public perception. He recognized that coalition warfare required visible unity, even when private disagreements existed. Yet his confidence could appear rigid. His belief in centralized authority sometimes clashed with American commanders accustomed to broader autonomy. He believed he was securing the Northern Road network. Patton believed he was racing against time in the South. Both considered their methods essential. The Allied alliance was vast and complex. British, American, Canadian, and other Allied forces operated under a unified command, but national identities remained strong. Differences in military culture, doctrine, and personality were unavoidable. Eisenhower's greatest strength was balance. He understood that unity was as critical as firepower. His decision to place American armies under Montgomery's temporary authority was operationally logical, but politically delicate. American public opinion closely followed battlefield developments. American commanders guarded their reputations carefully. British leadership carried its own expectations. The German offensive intensified these sensitivities. Roads in the Ardennes became shared arteries. Convoys from different national formations converged. Military police from multiple commands attempted to regulate traffic. Engineers worked continuously to widen frozen passageways. Clear coordination was required. Requests for priority access to certain roads carried weight. Assigning traffic control meant determining which formations advanced first. Such decisions, though practical, carried symbolic implications. If one commander appeared to be directing another's movements, interpretations followed. The battlefield did not pause for diplomatic comfort. By late December, Patton's forces were advancing north toward Bastogne. Montgomery's northern forces prepared to launch a counteroffensive southward once the German advance stalled. The two pincers were intended to meet, but timing mattered. In the coming days, public statements would complicate private cooperation, because the Battle of the Bulge was not only about armor and infantry, it was about credibility. And in coalition warfare, credibility can be as fragile as a frozen road under the weight of tanks. For the German High Command, the Ardennes offensive, codenamed Unternehmung Wacht am Rhein, was a calculated gamble born of desperation. By late 1944, Germany was fighting on two collapsing fronts. The Red Army was advancing from the east with overwhelming force. Allied bombers struck industrial targets daily. Oil supplies were critically low. The Luftwaffe had been weakened. Experienced infantry replacements were scarce. Hitler believed only a dramatic, unexpected blow in the west could fracture Allied unity. The objective was bold. Strike through the Ardennes, cross the Meuse River, capture Antwerp, and split British and American armies. If Antwerp fell, the British would be cut off from the main Allied supply network. Political distrust between London and Washington might deepen. German planning assumed surprise would compensate for material weakness. Initially, surprise worked. American units in the Ardennes were thinly deployed. Communications were disrupted. German armored columns advanced rapidly in the first days. Kampfgruppe Piper of the 1st SS Panzer Division pushed aggressively toward the Meuse before running into fuel shortages and stiff resistance. But the German timetable was fragile. Their plan depended on speed, rapid seizure of road junctions, uninterrupted fuel delivery, and minimal Allied coordination. Bastogne was expected to fall quickly. Instead, American defenders held. Each hour of delay strained German supply lines. Fuel convoys were slowed by damaged roads and Allied air attacks once the weather cleared. Traffic congestion plagued German columns as much as Allied ones. Captured American fuel depots were insufficient. The same narrow forest roads that enabled surprise now limited maneuver. When Allied command began reorganizing effectively, Montgomery securing the north, Patton advancing from the south, German commanders recognized their window was narrowing. The German gamble depended on Allied confusion. Once Allied coordination improved, the offensive strategic logic began to erode. And the road network at the center of the bulge became contested not just by armor but by time itself. Beyond headquarters debates, the reality of the Ardennes was endured by ordinary soldiers. American infantry dug into frozen ground with inadequate winter clothing. Many divisions had been told they were in a quiet sector. Artillery shells shattered trees overhead, sending splintered wood slicing through foxholes. Frostbite cases mounted. Medical stations overflowed. Field surgeons operated under canvas in sub-zero temperatures. Supply trucks struggled through ice-coated routes. Drivers often worked without headlights at night to avoid detection. Engineers labored to keep bridges intact and roads passable. Snowplows ran constantly. Military police directed traffic at intersections clogged with armor, ambulances, and retreating units. In Bastogne, encircled paratroopers rationed ammunition. Artillery batteries counted shells carefully. Wounded men waited days for evacuation. German loudspeakers broadcast surrender demands across snowy fields when Patton's Third Army began pushing north on December 22nd. Soldiers marched through sleet and freezing rain. Tank engines required constant maintenance to prevent freezing. Fuel consumption increased in cold conditions. The phrase "clear the road" was not abstract. It meant removing wrecked vehicles. It meant breaking traffic jams that could stretch for miles. It meant coordinating movement between divisions that had never before operated side by side. The relief of Bastogne on December 26, when elements of the 4th Armored Division broke through the German ring, was achieved only because roads had been forced open under relentless pressure. For the men on the ground, there was no debate about prestige. There was only the need to move. On January 7, 1945, Field Marshal Montgomery held a press conference. By then, the German offensive had been halted. Allied counterattacks were underway from north and south. The bulge was shrinking. Montgomery described the situation in structured terms. He explained how he had taken command of the northern sector, reorganized forces, and stabilized the front. He emphasized the importance of careful planning before launching counterattacks. His tone was confident. Many American officers perceived the remarks differently. Reports circulated that Montgomery appeared to imply primary credit for halting the German advance. Though he praised American soldiers, the emphasis on his own role in stabilizing the North was noted carefully within U.S. headquarters. Patton, who had executed one of the most rapid operational pivots of the war and had relieved Bastogne, reacted sharply in private writings. In his diary entries from January 1945, he expressed anger over what he saw as self-promotion at the expense of American forces. Eisenhower faced a delicate moment. Public unity was essential. German propaganda sought signs of Allied division. Newspapers on both sides of the Atlantic reported the Ardennes crisis closely. Political leaders in Washington and London monitored the tone of statements. The issue was not whether Montgomery had contributed, he had, nor whether Patton had acted decisively, he had. The issue was perception. Coalition warfare required coordination not only on roads, but in words. And in the days following that press conference, tension rose quietly between headquarters. The road had been cleared physically. But another kind of clearing, of authority, of credit, of recognition, remained unsettled. December 22, 1944. At precisely 6 o'clock hours, elements of the U.S. Third Army began attacking north. The maneuver had been prepared in urgency, but executed with precision. Patton had disengaged 3 divisions, the 4th Armored Division, the 26th Infantry Division, and the 80th Infantry Division, and redirected them toward the southern flank of the German penetration. It was a 90-degree wheel in winter conditions. Artillery units reoriented their guns. Supply depots shifted routes overnight. Staff officers recalculated distances and fuel consumption in freezing weather. Engineers reinforced bridges under threat of collapse from ice. Patton's order was simple in objective: strike toward Bastogne. The terrain offered little advantage. The Ardennes forest restricted visibility. German defensive positions were layered along ridgelines and crossroads. Snow reduced traction for armored vehicles. Air support remained limited until skies began clearing on December 23rd. Still, Third Army advanced. By December 24th, the 4th Armored Division, under Major General Hugh Gaff, he penetrated German outer defenses south of Bastogne. Resistance stiffened. German units, aware of the strategic importance of Bastogne's road network, fought with determination. Panzer divisions attempted to hold corridors open for their own westward push. But German momentum was slowing. Fuel shortages forced armored units to abandon vehicles. Allied fighter bombers, once weather improved, began striking supply columns. American artillery massed effectively along advancing axes. On December 26, 1944, at approximately 1650 hours, a spearhead from the 4th Armored Division made contact with the encircled defenders of Bastogne. The siege was broken. The corridor was narrow and vulnerable. German forces continued counterattacks in the surrounding woods. Yet the psychological impact was immediate. Bastogne had not fallen. The German timetable was irreparably disrupted. Patton had reached the crossroads. Meanwhile, in the north, Montgomery's command prepared for coordinated counteroffensives aimed at compressing the Bulge from above. The U.S. First Army regrouped. Defensive lines along the Meuse held firm. German forces were now under pressure from two directions. The turning point had arrived not in a single dramatic clash, but in the steady erosion of German initiative. The Ardennes offensive had relied on speed, surprise, and fractured Allied response. By late December, Allied response was no longer fractured. The road network that had once enabled German advance now served Allied coordination. Traffic still clogged frozen lanes. Vehicles still stalled. But operational intent had aligned. The Germans no longer dictated tempo. On January 1, 1945, Germany launched Operation Bodenplatte, a large-scale air attack against Allied airfields in the Low Countries. It inflicted damage but cost the Luftwaffe irreplaceable aircraft and experienced pilots. The effort failed to reverse the ground situation. On January 3rd, Allied forces began systematic counterattacks from the north. Montgomery directed these operations cautiously, ensuring artillery concentration and secure flanks. From the south, Patton continued pushing northward, widening the Bastogne corridor and engaging German units attempting withdrawal. The Bulge began to shrink. It was at this moment, when victory was becoming visible but not yet secure, that the war of perception emerged alongside the war of maneuver. Because while armored divisions fought through forests and artillery pounded ridgelines, words were being prepared for public audiences. And words can shape memory as powerfully as battlefield maps. On January 7th, Montgomery addressed reporters. He outlined the defensive measures taken in the North. He described the reorganization of American forces under his command. He emphasized the deliberate nature of the counteroffensive strategy. He also praised the courage of American troops. But the framing mattered. In Washington and within American headquarters in Europe, interpretations formed quickly. Many officers believed Montgomery's remarks implied that British leadership had stabilized a faltering American front. The implication, intended or not, struck sensitive ground. Patton, who had executed one of the most aggressive maneuvers of the campaign, read summaries of the conference. His private writings recorded anger and disbelief. He felt the achievements of Third Army were being minimized. Eisenhower, ever aware of alliance cohesion, recognized the danger. He understood that the German offensive had aimed not only to seize ground, but to fracture trust between Allied partners. Public disagreement risked serving that objective. Behind closed doors, tension sharpened. The roads in the Ardennes had been physically cleared by engineers and soldiers under fire. Now, the metaphorical road between commanders required careful navigation, because what was said next, and how it was interpreted, would determine whether the victory at Bastogne remained unified or became divided by pride. By early January 1945, the German offensive had lost its initiative. Allied forces were advancing from both shoulders of the Bulge. Bastogne was secure. German armor, short on fuel and ammunition, was withdrawing eastward through the same forests it had stormed weeks earlier. But tension inside Allied headquarters had not fully subsided. On January 7th, Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery's press conference circulated quickly through American command channels. Reports summarized his remarks as emphasizing his role in restoring order in the North and organizing the counterattack. General George S. Patton read those reports carefully. In his personal diary entry dated January 8, 1945, Patton recorded his reaction. He described Montgomery's comments as self-serving. He believed the British Field Marshal had implied that American forces had required British leadership to stabilize the situation. Patton did not respond publicly. He responded privately and forcefully. According to staff recollections and his own diary, Patton considered the remarks an attempt to claim credit for a battle in which American forces had borne the heaviest burden. The U.S. First Army had absorbed the initial shock. The U.S. Third Army had executed the relief of Bastown. American casualties were immense. Patton's frustration was not theatrical. It reflected his belief in accountability and recognition within coalition warfare. He believed the record must be accurate. While Montgomery had indeed reorganized and strengthened the Northern defense, Patton saw the decisive operational shift as the rapid pivot of Third Army and the sustained American resistance that had halted the German timetable. The phrase "clear the road" emerged in this climate. Operationally, road clearance had been essential during the crisis. Coordinating Allied movement required strict traffic control. Requests for priority passage moved through command channels constantly. Montgomery's Northern Command required certain routes secured for defensive repositioning. Patton's advancing columns required passage northward at maximum speed. The literal clearing of roads had been negotiated through staff coordination, sometimes smoothly, sometimes with friction. But in Patton's interpretation, the metaphorical implication mattered more. He believed no one needed to clear the road for him. Third Army had already forced its way through snow, congestion, and resistance. In diary notes from January 1945, Patton wrote that he would not tolerate being portrayed as subordinate in initiative. He emphasized that his army had acted aggressively and independently within Eisenhower's directives. Eisenhower intervened quietly. The Supreme Commander recognized the risk of public division. He wrote to Montgomery, expressing concern over the tone of the press conference. Montgomery later issued clarifications, acknowledging American contributions more explicitly. The crisis did not escalate publicly, but the relationship between Patton and Montgomery cooled further. Both men continued fighting the war professionally. Both obeyed Eisenhower's authority. Both contributed materially to the final defeat of Germany. Yet the Ardennes had exposed a deeper truth about coalition command. Victory requires coordination, but coordination often challenges pride. By mid-January, Allied counterattacks from north and south linked up, compressing German forces back toward their starting positions. On January 16, 1945, American forces from Patton's Third Army met elements of the First Army near Hufalalies, effectively closing the Bulge. The German offensive had failed. It had cost Germany irreplaceable armored strength. Elite panzer divisions were depleted. Fuel reserves were nearly exhausted. Offensive capability in the West would never fully recover. For the Allies, the victory restored strategic momentum. Yet the memory of those winter weeks carried two parallel narratives. One was tactical, of frozen forests, rapid redeployment, and stubborn defense. The other was human, of commanders navigating ego, responsibility, and public perception, while the outcome of the war still hung in balance. Patton never issued a dramatic public rebuke. His response remained largely in private writings and conversations with staff. His anger was real, but controlled within the chain of. Montgomery continued to defend his version of events in post-war accounts. Historians would later analyze the press conference, the diary entries, and the operational records. The conclusion is measured. Montgomery did stabilize the northern shoulder. Patton did execute one of the most remarkable operational pivots of the European campaign. Neither action alone ended the Bulge. Together, under Eisenhower's coordination, they did. And so the question of what Patton said when Montgomery asked him to clear the road is less about a single sentence spoken across a map table. It is about how a commander responds when he believes his path is obstructed. By weather, by traffic, or by reputation. Patton's answer was consistent with his character. He cleared it himself. By mid-January 1945, the Ardennes salient had largely collapsed. On January 16th, elements of the U.S. First Army advancing south met units of Patton's Third Army pushing north near Houffalize. The German wedge was effectively cut in half. Over the following days, organized German resistance withdrew eastward toward the Siegfried Line. The Battle of the Bulge was over. It had lasted just over a month. Its cost was staggering. American forces suffered approximately 89,000 casualties, including more than 19,000 killed. It was one of the bloodiest engagements fought by the United States Army in World War II. Thousands more were wounded, captured, or missing. Frostbite cases numbered in the thousands. British forces engaged in the northern sector sustained significantly lower casualties, roughly 1,400 total. German losses were severe, estimated between 80,000 and 100,000 casualties, along with the destruction or abandonment of hundreds of tanks and assault guns. But numbers alone did not capture the strategic consequences. Germany had committed elite armored formations to the offensive. Units such as the 1st SS Panzer Division, 2nd Panzer Division, and Panzer Lehr Division were mauled. Fuel reserves were depleted beyond recovery. Experienced officers and non-commissioned leaders were lost in numbers. Germany could not replace. The Luftwaffe's January 1st air assault, Operation Bodenplatte, further drained already scarce pilot strength. After the Bulge, Germany would never again mount a large-scale offensive in the West. For the Allies, the battle brought both relief and recalibration. The shock of the initial breakthrough exposed weaknesses in intelligence assessment. Allied commanders had underestimated Germany's capacity to regroup. Defensive sectors considered quiet were revealed to be vulnerable. Winter preparedness, reconnaissance coverage, and reserve positioning were scrutinized closely. Eisenhower ordered adjustments to defensive doctrine. Air-ground coordination was refined. Strategic reserves were reconsidered. Command communication structures were tightened to prevent isolation between army groups. The war did not slow. In February 1945, Allied forces resumed their broad advance toward the Rhine. Patton's Third Army pushed east across the Saar and into the Palatinate. Montgomery's 21st Army Group prepared for the eventual crossing of the Rhine in the north. The coalition remained intact, but the Ardennes left emotional traces within command relationships. Patton continued to write candidly in his diary. His criticism of Montgomery's January press conference did not soften over time. He believed that American effort had carried the decisive burden of the battle. Montgomery, for his part, maintained that his reorganization of the northern sector had been essential to halting the German advance. Eisenhower handled the tension with restraint. He recognized that open conflict between senior Allied commanders would serve no one, least of all the troops still fighting across Europe. His correspondence with both men emphasized unity, shared credit, and the larger objective: unconditional surrender of Nazi Germany. Publicly, Allied leadership presented a unified narrative. Privately, the memory of January 1945 lingered. Yet at the operational level, cooperation continued effectively. American and British forces coordinated artillery support, air cover, and logistical movement as they pressed toward Germany's heartland. The Bulge had tested the alliance. It had not broken it. For the soldiers who survived the frozen forests, the aftermath was immediate and personal. Units rotated out of the line for rest when possible. Replacement troops arrived to fill depleted ranks. Medics treated lingering cold injuries. Equipment damaged by ice and shellfire was repaired or replaced. Letters home described exhaustion rather than triumph. Many veterans later recalled the Ardennes as the harshest conditions they endured during the war, not only for combat intensity, but for cold. The winter of 1944-45 was one of the coldest in decades across Western Europe. Snowdrifts buried equipment. Weapons jammed. Men slept in foxholes lined with pine branches for insulation. When the offensive ended, the forest remained scarred. Burned-out vehicles marked crossroads. Destroyed villages bore silent testimony to artillery duels. Civilians returned cautiously to homes damaged or destroyed by weeks of fighting. Strategically, the Bulge delayed Allied plans by several weeks, but it also consumed Germany's final strategic reserves. When the Red Army launched its Vistula-Oder offensive in January 1945, German forces in the east faced overwhelming pressure with diminished reinforcements available. The Ardennes gamble had diverted strength that could have reinforced the collapsing Eastern Front. In that sense, the failed offensive hastened Germany's defeat. And within Allied command circles, the question of who had cleared which road faded before the reality that all roads now led east, toward the Rhine, toward Berlin, toward the end. When the guns quieted in the Ardennes, the war did not pause for reflection. By February 1945, Allied forces were pressing toward the Rhine along a broad front. In the south, Patton's Third Army crossed the Sauer and advanced into western Germany with renewed momentum. In the north, Montgomery prepared Operation Veritable and later Operation Plunder, the carefully staged crossings that would carry British and American forces over the Rhine. Operationally, cooperation resumed its steady rhythm. Strategy, Germany was collapsing. Yet memory had already begun to form. The Battle of the Bulge quickly entered public consciousness as a dramatic episode. A surprise attack, a desperate defense, a winter struggle against both enemy and environment. American newspapers emphasized Bastogne and the defiant stand of surrounded troops. The name Bulge itself came from the visible distortion in front lines on situation maps published for readers. For the American public, the narrative centered on resilience. For British audiences, the stabilization of the northern sector and the coordinated counterattack were equally important. Inside professional military circles, assessment was more nuanced. After-action reports examined intelligence failures that allowed surprise. Staff studies analyzed traffic control breakdowns and communications gaps. The difficulty of moving entire armies through narrow forest roads under winter conditions became a case study in operational logistics. The phrase, "clear the road," retained both literal and symbolic weight. Engineers had physically cleared blocked routes, removed wrecked vehicles, repaired bridges, and widened icy corridors under fire. Without those efforts, neither Patton's relief of Bastogne nor Montgomery's northern counterattack could have unfolded as they did. But symbolically, clearing the road referred to authority, to who led, who followed, and who received credit. In post-war years, memoirs sharpened these interpretations. Patton did not live to publish a full account of the European campaign. He died in December 1945 following an automobile accident in Germany. His diaries and papers, later published, revealed candid reactions to events, including his anger over Montgomery's January 1945 press conference. Montgomery, who survived the war and wrote extensively, defended his decisions as necessary and effective. He argued that his reorganization prevented a broader German breakthrough and that his deliberate counterattack preserved Allied strength. Historians examining operational records generally agree on several points. Montgomery did stabilize the northern shoulder at a critical moment. Patton did execute one of the most rapid and successful operational pivots of the war. Eisenhower's decision to divide command temporarily was practical and likely prevented further confusion. No single commander won the Battle of the Bulge. It was a coalition victory, and coalition victories are rarely tidy. The German objective, to fracture Allied unity, failed decisively. Despite tension, despite bruised pride, despite sharp diary entries and guarded correspondence, the alliance held. In fact, the experience strengthened certain aspects of cooperation. Allied command became more cautious about intelligence interpretation. Greater emphasis was placed on maintaining flexible reserves. Air-ground coordination was refined further for the final offensives into Germany. By March 1945, Allied forces crossed the Rhine at multiple points. In April, they encircled the Ruhr, capturing hundreds of thousands of German troops. By May 7th, Germany signed unconditional surrender at Reims. The winter crisis in the Ardennes became one chapter in a much larger collapse. Yet reputations linger longer than battle maps. Patton remained, in American memory, the embodiment of aggressive maneuver, bold, controversial, relentless. Montgomery remained, in British memory, the disciplined planner who valued method over haste. Their rivalry became part of the broader narrative of Allied command. But rivalry did not equal failure. The road between them, strained in January 1945, did not break the alliance. It bent under pressure, then held. And for the soldiers who had frozen in foxholes and fought through snow-clogged forests, those debates mattered far less than survival. They remembered the cold. They remembered artillery shaking the trees. They remembered the moment the corridor into Bastogne finally opened. When veterans later described those days, they spoke of movement, of columns creeping forward inch, of tank engines revving against ice, of engineers working with numb hands to keep convoys flowing. The Bulge was a battle of roads as much as of guns, and when the fighting ended, those roads carried Allied armies eastward without interruption. In the long view of history, the question was never simply what Patton said. It was whether the alliance endured the strain of saying it. It did. The Ardennes taught many lessons, some obvious, some subtle, some bitterly earned in snow and blood. Roads in war are never merely concrete and dirt. They are arteries of movement, supply, and survival. In the Bulge, they became symbols of urgency, of authority, and of the interplay between strategy and ego. Clearing a road meant enabling an army to move. It also meant asserting command, ensuring recognition, and maintaining cohesion within a coalition. Patton's approach embodied action. Speed, decisiveness, and relentless pressure defined his philosophy. He believed that obstacles, whether frozen roads, enemy resistance, or perceived slights, were to be overcome by initiative. In contrast, Montgomery demonstrated the value of methodical control of preparation and coordination, and of careful management of risk. Both approaches were necessary. Both were valid. Both contributed to victory. History remembers the Battle of the Bulge not only for tanks and snow, but for the human dimension. The decisions made under freezing conditions, the diaries scrawled by commanders. the private frustrations behind public unity. In those weeks, leadership was tested in ways as exacting as the forest itself. Ego, pride, and responsibility intertwined with strategy, shaping outcomes as much as artillery and armor. When Patton cleared the road, he did more than move an army. He reaffirmed a principle: that initiative matters, and that action under pressure can turn crisis into opportunity. Yet the alliance endured because it allowed both approaches to coexist, because command structures were flexible, and because shared objectives outweighed personal friction. The Ardennes is a reminder that victory in war is not only measured in kilometers gained or casualties inflicted. It is measured in decisions, in trust maintained under tension, and in the quiet courage of those who move forward when the path is blocked. Roads can freeze, armies can stumble, leaders can clash, yet history favors those who adapt, who act decisively, and who never forget the human cost of every mile cleared. In the winter of 1940-45, the roads through the Ardennes were cleared, in snow, in strategy, and in legacy.